poor Apache widow with her children begged the lonely cowboy to take her as his wife. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Winter settled early across the northern New Mexico territory in 1881, and the cold held firm through every hour of daylight. The sky stayed a pale, washed-out blue. The wind carried bits of frozen dust across the open land, and the ground felt solid beneath every boot step. Brady Lorne moved along the lower ridge with the slow, steady pace he used when he worked alone, his shoulders stiff from the cold and the weight of years that pressed on him whether he wanted it or not. He crouched near a metal trap he had set before sunrise. The steel jaws were empty, the ground around them disturbed only by faint prints. He brushed off a layer of frost and reset the mechanism, his gloved hands moving with practiced control. He kept his focus on the simple motions because simple work steadied him. Work didn't ask questions about the ambush 5 years earlier, the one where his brother didn't make it out. Work didn't demand explanations about why he left the Army Scouts or why he avoided any town that knew his name. Out here, he answered to no one, and that suited him. He straightened, breath fogging the air. His clothes were plain, dark coat, wool shirt, sturdy pants patched at the knee. His body carried old strength, broad shoulders, thick forearms, a frame built from hauling lumber, not from showing it off. His face stayed lined and tired even when he slept. Some days he wondered if age was catching him earlier than it should, or if grief did that to a man. He was about to walk toward the next trap when movement caught his eye. He stopped mid-step, boots planted, heart tightening without warning. Far down the slope, 3 shapes moved against the pale earth. At first he thought they might be coyotes, but coyotes didn't walk upright and cling to each other for balance. The figures moved unevenly, the smallest 2 stumbling often. He watched without moving, letting his eyes adjust to the distance. A woman, 2 children. They walked straight toward his property. Brady felt his shoulders tense. Strangers rarely crossed this land. When they did, it usually meant trouble or a request he didn't want to answer. He stayed still, hand resting on the butt of his holstered revolver. Not to lift it, just to remind himself it was there. The woman came closer, step by step. She leaned forward slightly, as if the cold pushed against her chest with every breath. Her dress was deerskin, ripped at the neckline in a way that exposed part of her cleavage and the curve of her chest. The tear wasn't shaped by choice. It looked pulled, as if caught on brush or a rough hand. Her figure was full and soft, her hips visible under the worn fabric, her gait uneven from long travel. Dark hair fell around her face, strands stiff from cold and dust. The boy beside her looked about 6, thin and shivering. The little girl clung to her mother's leg, her small blanket barely covering her shoulders. Brady walked toward them with quiet steps. He didn't rush. He didn't call out. He approached the same way he approached frightened horses, slow, controlled, no sudden movements. When they stood a few feet apart, the woman lifted her chin and met his eyes. She didn't hide her fear. She didn't try to pretend she had strength left. She looked at him like someone who had run out of choices. "Please," her voice shook harshly, the cold scraping against her throat. "We need shelter. I can work. I can cook. I can do anything you ask." She pulled the children forward gently, letting him see their faces. "If you want a wife, I could be that too. Just don't send us away." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't prepared for someone offering themselves so plainly, not in this state, not with children hanging onto them. It stirred something he hadn't felt in years, anger at whoever did this to her, and discomfort at being placed in the position of deciding their fate. He noticed bruises on her wrists, faint but clear. He saw the exhaustion in her legs, the stiffness in her fingers, the way she forced herself to stay upright. He also saw the curve of her chest where the torn fabric hung open. He looked away quickly, jaw tightening. She didn't need more shame. Brady didn't answer immediately. He weighed the situation the way he always did, slowly, carefully, scanning the land behind them for signs of pursuit. He heard only wind, no riders, no tracks. No danger approaching. Just a woman with no strength left and two children who might not make it through the night if he turned them away. He finally spoke. His voice came out low and steady. "You can stay the night." The boy let out a small breath. The girl pressed her face into her mother's leg. The woman's shoulders dropped, not from relief, but from the sudden lack of tension. She nodded once, unable to speak further, then followed when Brady turned toward the cabin. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't touch her. He kept his steps slow so she wouldn't fall behind. The cabin sat near a cluster of fir trees, smoke rising from the stone chimney in thin trails. Brady opened the door and stepped aside so they could enter first. The warmth inside hit them immediately. The fire burned steady, the smell of wood smoke thick in the air. The room held a single bed, a small table, a shelf of tools, and a pot of leftover stew resting near the hearth. The woman stepped in cautiously. She loosened her shawl, revealing more of the torn neckline and the soft curve of her shoulder. The warmth made her cheeks flush. The children moved straight toward the fire without being told. Brady knelt near the hearth and stirred the coals until the flames rose higher. He glanced back at the woman. She stood very still, arms pulled close to her torso. He saw her tremble, not from cold now, but from the sudden shift to safety. Relief could shake a person harder than fear. "You can sit," Brady said quietly. She lowered herself near the fire, legs folded under her, hands held open to the heat. Her breathing slowed little by little. The children leaned against her sides, their eyes half closed. Brady filled bowls with stew. He handed them out one by one. The boy ate quickly but tried to stay polite. The girl dropped food on her blanket, wiping her mouth with her sleeve. The woman ate last, slow and controlled, each bite taken as if she needed to make sure it wasn't a dream. When the children finally fell asleep on a rug near the fire, Brady sat on the edge of the table. He watched them without speaking. He felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest, an ache that wasn't painful but heavy, like the sense of returning to a room he hadn't entered in years. He hadn't seen children inside his home since before his brother died. The sight stirred old memories he usually kept locked away. The woman kept her eyes on the fire. Her fingers brushed lightly over her son's hair, then over her daughter's small shoulder. Her movements were gentle, practiced, tired. After several minutes, she spoke, voice quiet. "My name is Nayati. My husband died in an ambush. His family blamed me and forced us out." She didn't lift her head. "We've been walking for weeks." Brady didn't ask questions about who chased her or who hurt her. Certain things didn't need details. The bruises told enough. He answered simply, "You're safe here." She looked up finally. Her eyes were dark and glossy, reflecting the fire. "I have no family. No one to go back to." Brady nodded once. "Then stay here as long as you need." Her lips parted slightly, stunned by how easily he said it. Not like a man bargaining. Not like a man expecting something in return. More like someone who understood the weight of being alone. She lowered her head again, eyes filling. "Thank you," she whispered. Brady didn't respond. He wasn't used to gratitude. He watched the snow gathering outside the window, the wind pushing against the walls, and for the first time in a long while, the cabin no longer fell hollow. He added another log to the fire. The flames climbed. The woman breathed deeper. The children slept without fear. And Brady Lorne, a man who had spent years refusing to let anyone near him, realized the silence in his home had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It held 4 breaths instead of 1. And that simple fact unsettled him more than any danger he'd faced. But he didn't push them away. He stayed in the room and let the change happen. Because something in him, something buried deep, wanted them there. The fire burned steady through the night, its glow pushing back the cold that pressed against the cabin walls. Brady stayed awake longer than he planned, sitting at the table with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on the door as if expecting someone to knock or some old trouble to follow the woman and her children across the ridge. Nothing moved outside except the wind. The sky darkened fully, snow drifted across the clearing, and the land settled into a deep, heavy quiet. Nayati sat close to the fire with her children curled against her sides. Brady could tell she was exhausted, but every few minutes she lifted her head, scanned the room, then lowered her gaze again. He recognized the habit. People who lived on the run didn't fall asleep easily, not even when warmth wrapped around them. Brady stood finally and checked the latch on the door a second time, making sure it held firm. Nayati watched him without lifting her face fully. She seemed to wait for him to speak, but he didn't. Words came slow for him, even on calm days. Tonight, they felt heavier, like the cold made them stick in his throat. "You can use the bed," he said at last, voice low. "The kids, too. I'll stay up a while." Nayati shook her head. "We'll stay here by the fire. They'll sleep better like this." Brady didn't push it. He returned to the table, pulled off his gloves, and rubbed his hands together, letting circulation return. Part of him wanted to ask why her husband's family cast her out. Part of him wanted to ask who hurt her wrists or how long she'd been traveling. But he kept still, knowing pressing her too soon could drive her into silence. People talked when they realized no one was demanding anything of them. After several minutes, Nayati spoke quietly. "How long have you been here alone?" Brady didn't expect her to start the conversation. He paused before answering. 5 years, he said. Long enough to know every fence post by memory. She studied him slowly, her eyes moving over his worn coat, the way his shoulders held a constant tension, his stubble shadowed across his jaw. Why? He didn't flinch at the question, but it settled in his chest with a weight he had ignored for years. He didn't usually say much about his past. Out here, no one asked, but she looked at him like the truth mattered, not for gossip, but to know the man whose home she'd stepped into. "I lost my brother on a trail job. After that, towns didn't feel right. Noise didn't feel right. Too many people asking things I didn't want to answer." Brady rubbed his thumbs along the table's edge. "So I stayed out here. Work kept me from thinking too much." Nayati listened carefully, her expression steady, not pitying. She didn't interrupt. He continued, the words leaving him slower this time. "My mission was just to keep the land running. Keep my mind quiet. Didn't plan for company." He waited for her reaction. Her voice came soft but firm. "We won't stay if it hurts you." "It doesn't," he said quickly, surprising himself with how honest it sounded. "I'm just adjusting." The fire cracked behind her. Her shoulders eased slightly. A few moments passed before she spoke again, and this time, her tone carried the weight of something she had been holding back. "Those men, the ones who hurt my wrists, they were my husband's cousins." She touched her wrist lightly, as if reminding herself the bruises were still there. "After he died, they said feeding us was wasteful. They tried to hand me off to another man, someone I didn't know." Brady felt his jaw tighten. He wasn't good at saying comforting things, but anger came easily. Not loud anger, quiet anger that settled deep. "Did they follow you?" he asked. "No, they didn't think I'd survive the cold." She looked toward her children, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. They didn't care either way. Brady's chest tightened at the matter-of-fact way she said it. No panic, no drama, just truth from someone who lived through worse than she should have. He stood up from the table and moved to the window. Snow pressed against the glass in thin layers. The trees stood thick and dark beyond the clearing. He scanned the ridge with sharp, trained eyes. No tracks, no fresh disturbances, no shadows moving between the trees. "You're safe here," he repeated, but this time the words sounded heavier. Not a courtesy, but a commitment. Nayati lowered her head, but he saw the faint tremble in her chin before she looked away. She wasn't used to anyone believing she deserved safety. The children shifted in their sleep. The boy stirred first, his eyes cracking open. He looked at Brady with hesitation, unsure if he was allowed to move or speak. Brady knelt so he wouldn't tower over him. "You hungry still?" he asked. The boy nodded once. Brady warmed the remaining stew and handed him a smaller bowl, careful not to overwhelm him. The boy ate quietly but looked up at Brady between bites, measuring him. Brady recognized that look, assessing danger, wondering what a man like him would do with strangers in his home. Brady kept his posture calm, his movements slow. When the boy finished, Brady returned the empty bowl to the table. Nayati whispered, "His name is Toma. Her name is Aya." She shifted the little girl onto her lap and wrapped her shawl around both children. They don't talk much around new places. I don't either, Brady said. It drew the faintest breath of amusement from her. Barely a smile, more like a small release of tension. But it was the first sign she wasn't drowning entirely in fear. The hours passed steadily. Brady fixed a loose hinge on the door, while Nayati settled the children on a folded blanket near the fire. The room warmed more with bodies inside. Brady wasn't used to that. He had spent years hearing only his own breathing at night. Now, there were 3 small breaths to go with it. The change felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. When Nayati finally laid down beside her children, she didn't close her eyes immediately. She watched Brady as he placed another log on the fire, the light showing the lines on his face, the tired set of his shoulders, the quiet attention in his eyes. "Why did you help us?" she asked suddenly, her voice low. Brady didn't face her right away. He let the question hang in the air while he adjusted the log with the iron poker. Only when the flames took again did he answer. "You look cold," he said, "and they looked hungry." He paused, speaking the next word slower. "And I'm not the kind of man who leaves people outside to die." She nodded once, accepting the answer. She didn't probe deeper. She didn't ask what kind of man he used to be or what kind of man he was trying to be now. She seemed to understand some truths didn't need long explanations. Brady sat against the wall, near the door. He loosened his coat, crossed his arms, and allowed his breathing to slow. He stayed awake long after she and the children fell asleep, listening to the small sounds of their rest, the tiny shifts of blankets, the quiet sighs, the soft murmur of Aya sucking on her thumb. He wondered how long they had traveled like this. He wondered how they survived each night. He wondered what drove a woman with 2 children to cross empty land without protection or supplies. And for the first time in years, he wondered what tomorrow would feel like with someone else inside the cabin. The night eventually settled into full silence. Brady remained awake, watching the fire fade to embers, a thought forming slowly in the back of his mind. He had let them in for one night, but now that they were here, he wasn't sure he could imagine sending them away. He didn't say out loud. He didn't even fully accept it yet. But the feeling was there, and it was growing. Brady woke before sunrise, the cabin still dark except for the faint glow of cooling embers. His back felt stiff from sleeping against the wall, but the stiffness wasn't what held his attention. What he noticed first, what made him pause before standing, was the soft rhythm of 3 other breaths filling the room. For a moment he stayed still, letting the unfamiliar warmth of that sound settle inside him. He wasn't used to waking to anyone's breathing but his own. When he finally rose, he did so quietly. He didn't want to startle anyone. The floor creaked under his boots, and Nayati stirred, lifting her head slightly, her eyes adjusting to the dark. She didn't look frightened, only alert, like someone who survived many nights by waking quickly. Her children slept pressed against her sides, Aya's small hand clinging to a fold of her mother's dress. Brady nodded to her in a silent greeting, and she returned it with a tired blink. She watched him move around the cabin, as if studying the way he started his day, perhaps judging if this place was safe enough to trust. He didn't mind her eyes on him. He understood why she needed to watch. He grabbed a kettle, filled it with water from the bucket near the door, and hung it over the fire pit to heat. The sound of metal settling against the hook gave the room a small sense of routine, something steady and predictable. Brady noticed Nayati's shoulders ease slightly at the sound. Sometimes predictability meant more than kindness. He stepped outside for firewood, bracing himself against the cold. The sky held a gray tint, the ground covered in a thin layer of snow that hadn't fully hardened. No prints marked the clearing except the ones from yesterday. Brady checked the tree line the way he always did, calm, methodical, eyes sharp from years of scouting. Nothing moved among the firs. No smoke rose from distant camps. No horses stood tied in hidden spots. If anyone had followed Nayati, they weren't close. When he returned inside, the room had warmed slightly. Nayati knelt by the fire, feeding a small stick into the embers. Her torn neckline shifted as she leaned forward, revealing the curve of her chest in the firelight. She didn't adjust her dress or cover herself, not out of boldness, but because she was focused on her children, not her appearance. Aya had crawled halfway into her mother's lap, rubbing her eyes with a tiny fist. Thomas sat upright, watching Brady with the same careful attention he had shown the night before. Brady set the wood down and spoke quietly to avoid startling the children. "Kettle's heating. We'll have warm water soon." Toma nodded, not yet ready to speak. Aya hid her face briefly, then peeked at Brady again, curious. Nayati brushed the girl's hair back and whispered, "Say good morning." Aya didn't speak, but she waved a small hand. Brady gave her a gentle nod. He didn't expect words from her. Children opened up in their own time. As the kettle began to simmer, Brady stepped to the table and checked the supplies. He had enough dried beans, coffee grounds, and a small piece of smoked meat left from the week before. He wasn't prepared for guests, but he wasn't so sure he'd have to ration yet. He could hunt later. He made a mental list of what he'd need to gather from town eventually: flour, salt, maybe cloth, but he pushed that thought aside. He wasn't bringing her into a town full of eyes and questions. Not yet. Nayati watched him examine the shelves, and after a moment, she spoke in a low, steady tone. "We won't take more than we need. I can stretch food farther than most. I've done that for years." Brady shook his head slightly. "That's not your burden anymore. When the kids eat what I eat." She lowered her gaze, not offended, just surprised by the statement. Toma finally spoke, his voice soft. "Are we staying today?" Brady met the boy's eyes directly. "Yes, you're staying." The boy breathed out slowly, relief showing in his shoulders. Aya settled fully into her mother's lap, no longer clinging in fear. Brady poured the warm water into a basin and set it near the fire. "You can wash up," he said. "I'll step outside." Nayati hesitated. "You don't have to. I'll give you privacy," Brady answered simply, and stepped out before she could argue. The air outside cut through him with a sharp chill. He stood on the porch, watching the tree lean, keeping his ears tuned for any sound out of place. He didn't know why he felt the need to guard the door so strongly this morning. Maybe because last night he sensed how close she'd been to collapse. Maybe because he saw the bruises and couldn't shake the anger they stirred. Or maybe because letting her into his cabin broke open something he had spent years sealing away, and now he felt responsible for what came next. He heard the soft splash of water inside, a small, ordinary sound he hadn't heard in his home since before his brother died. The familiarity struck him harder than he expected. It reminded him that the cabin wasn't meant to stay empty forever, even if he had convinced himself it was. When he stepped back inside, the children were wrapped in blankets, their faces cleaner, their hair damp. Nayati's dress showed new stitching along one torn edge where she had mended it with a few pieces of thread she had carried in a small pouch. The neckline still fell open, but now the tear looked less harsh, more controlled. She sat straighter today, though fatigue still pulled at her posture. Brady noticed she had placed her small belongings, a thin comb, a bundle of herbs, a strip of leather, neatly near the wall, as if trying not to intrude more than necessary. He recognized the gesture. People who came from unstable places kept their things organized, ready to move again. "You're not leaving," he said quietly, responding to the thought she hadn't spoken. She stopped folding the blanket in her hands, startled by his certainty. "I didn't say. You don't have to. I see the way you're arranging things like you'll need to run again. You won't." He paused, letting the words land clearly. "Not while I'm here." Toma looked between them with wide eyes, unsure what Brady meant. Aya pressed her head into her mother's shoulder. Nayati swallowed and lowered her gaze again. "I don't want to cause trouble for you. You haven't. You don't know what might follow us. If it does, I'll handle it." She shook her head quietly. "You don't know the men my husband's family deals with." Brady stepped closer, not threatening, just steady. "I've dealt with worse." She held his eyes longer this time, not challenging him, just measuring how much of his promise came from experience and how much came from instinct. She found no hesitation in him. The kettle hissed softly, breaking the moment. Brady moved to prepare the morning coffee. As he worked, he asked something he hadn't dared earlier. "Do you want to stay longer than a day?" Nayati looked down at her children, who leaned against her without fear now. She placed a hand on each of their backs. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "If you'll allow it, yes." Brady nodded once, slow and sure, the decision settling inside him like a weight he didn't want to set down. Then stay. A silence followed, not uncomfortable, not tense, just new, unexplored. The kind that forms when four lives start shifting towards something different without anyone saying it outright. As Brady handed her a steaming cup, their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Outside, the sky began to clear. The wind quieted. The snow brightened in the growing light. Inside the cabin, for the first time since she arrived, Nayati sat with her back straight, not bracing for another blow or another command. And Brady realized something he hadn't admitted even to himself. He wasn't preparing to send them away. He was preparing to make room for them. The morning brightened slowly, the pale winter light pushing through the single window and revealing the edges of the cabin in a clearer way. Brady poured the last of the coffee grounds back into the tin, set it on the shelf, and began pulling on his gloves. He usually started his chores at first light, hauling water, checking snares, feeding the horses, but today felt different. The presence of two children on the floor and a woman watching him from near the fire made the room feel smaller and fuller, not cramped, just changed. He adjusted his coat twice before heading for the door, an unconscious attempt to settle nerves he didn't often feel. Before stepping outside, he turned back toward Nayati. "I'll be checking the traps past the creek. Won't take more than an hour." Nayati's eyes moved to the door, then back to him. "Is it safe for us while you're gone?" Her question held no challenge, only a mother's instinct. Brady answered without hesitation. "No one's been through this land in weeks. I checked the whole ridge last night before sleeping. You'll be fine." She nodded slowly, comforted but still cautious. He understood that. People who survived harsh treatment didn't let trust settle easily. Toma stood at her side, watching Brady prepare. The boy's thin fingers gripped the blanket wrapped around him. Brady crouched down so he wouldn't loom over him. "I'll be back soon," he said. "If something scares you, stay inside and keep the door latched." Toma nodded with more confidence than the night before. "We will." Aya peeked from behind Ayati's leg, her dark eyes wide, but not frightened like yesterday. Brady gave her a small, careful smile. She blinked and tucked her face back into her mother's dress. Brady stepped outside into the cold, shutting the door behind him with a quiet thud. Nayati let out a slow breath, her shoulders sinking as if she'd been holding herself too rigid. The cabin felt different now that he was gone, still warm, but quieter, more vulnerable. She sat for a moment, listening to his footsteps fade toward the creek. The children moved closer to the fire while she gathered her thoughts. A question lingered in her mind, one she didn't dare ask earlier. What will he expect in return for letting us stay? Men rarely gave shelter without wanting something back. Even the good ones eventually asked. Even her late husband had moments of temper when the world pressed too hard. But Brady had asked for nothing. Not a hand on his arm, not a promise of her body, not a word about being a wife. He had only asked if she wanted to stay. That alone unsettled her more than any demand might have, because she didn't know how to live without offering something to justify her presence. She forced herself to move. Stillness brought fear. Motion felt safer. She cleared the bowls from last night and washed them in the basin, using warm water from the kettle Brady left heating. The simple act steadied her. Toma followed her movements closely and asked, "Are we really staying here?" "For now," she answered softly, "until the land allows something different." He processed the answer with the seriousness of a child who had grown up too fast. Aya crawled into Nayati's lap, curling against her stomach. Nayati stroked her hair, feeling relief at how quickly the child warmed in this place. She looked around the cabin more closely now. The shelves were neatly arranged, tools sharpened, blankets folded near the bed. The man lived simply, organized, not like someone who expected visitors. She noticed something she hadn't before. A small wooden carving near the window, a horse, carefully shaped. Not something for utility, something for memory. It gave her a hint of the life he had before the cold years swallowed him. When Brady returned, his boots thudding across the frozen ground, Nayati straightened instinctively. The children also perked up, waiting for the door. Brady stepped in carrying 2 rabbits and a small pouch of herbs he found growing near the creek, surprisingly alive despite the cold. His breath came heavy from the walk. Snow clung to his coat and hair. Traps were full, he said. Better than usual. Toma's eyes widened. Can I see? Brady held out 1 rabbit by the scruff so the boy could inspect it. Toma touched the fur with a mixture of curiosity and awe. You caught this. Trap did most of the work, Brady said. But I'll teach you how it works when the weather warms. Toma nodded eagerly, excitement replacing fear. Aya pointed and giggled, a small sound but one that felt significant in the quiet cabin. Brady carried the rabbits to the table. As he prepared to skin them, he noticed Nayati watching him, her hands paused in mid-motion. She seemed unsure whether to step back and let him work or help him as a sign of gratitude. He solved the dilemma by speaking first. If you want, you can help with the herbs. We'll cook both rabbits for dinner. She joined him at the table, careful not to crowd him. She took the herbs, cleaned them, and crushed a few with practiced motions. Brady watched her hands briefly. They moved with confidence, efficient but gentle. Where'd you learn that? He asked quietly. My mother taught me when I was little, she replied. We didn't have doctors in our camps. Herbs did most of the work. Brady nodded. That explained the pouch she carried. He noticed a healing paste near her belongings that he hadn't seen earlier. Is that for your wrists? He asked. She stiffened for a moment, surprised he recognized it. Yes, it helps with swelling. Use as much as you need, he said. There's room here for anything that keeps you well. Her face softened, not quite a smile, but something close. As they prepared the meal together, the children played quietly near the fire. Brady noticed how often Nayati checked on them with her eyes, every few seconds, just to make sure they were safe. He also noticed how the children flinched whenever the wind rattled the window. Old fears didn't leave easily. To distract them, Brady asked Toma, You ever seen a horse up close? Toma shook his head. Only far away. Brady stood and motioned for him to follow. Come on, I'll show you mine. Nayati hesitated but saw no danger in it. She nodded for Toma to go. Outside, the cold bit harder, but Toma didn't mind. Brady led him to the small stable beside the cabin. Inside stood a strong gray mare with a calm posture and steady eyes. Toma's jaw dropped. She's huge, he whispered. Brady chuckled under his breath. She's gentle. Go on. Let her smell your hand. Toma stepped forward cautiously, and the mare lowered her head to sniff his palm. The boy froze at first, then smiled for the first time since arriving. A genuine smile. A child's smile, not one shaped by fear. Brady watched him closely, feeling something shift inside. Something unexpected, something he hadn't felt since the years before his brother died. He didn't name the feeling, but he didn't push it away either. Inside the cabin, Nayati stirred the pot. The scent of herbs and rabbit filled the room. She listened to the faint sound of Toma's laughter outside and felt her chest tighten with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. The little girl beside her leaned against her hip, warm and content. When Brady returned with Toma, both covered in bits of snow, Nayati looked up. Their eyes met again. Longer this time, steadier, as if each was trying to understand what the other wanted, but neither willing to rush toward an answer. Brady hung his coat by the door. He did good, he said. Didn't scare the mare once. Toma grinned proudly. As dinner simmered, Brady approached the fire and sat beside the children. Aya crawled onto his knee without fear. He froze, surprised, unsure how to position his hands. Nayati watched carefully, ready to intervene if needed, but Aya simply laid her head against his arm. Brady's posture softened slightly. He rested one hand lightly on her back. The warmth of her small body against him stirred a memory he had spent years burying, holding his younger brother when they were boys, keeping him warm during cold nights on long trail journeys. He pushed away the ache and focused on the present moment. Thomas sat beside him. Are we still staying tomorrow? Brady answered without hesitation. Yes. Nayati lowered her gaze, overwhelmed by how simple the answer was. Brady added, and the day after that, unless you decide otherwise. She swallowed hard, realizing she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to settle. Dinner filled the cabin with warmth, but something else filled it too. An unspoken understanding that the four of them were no longer strangers trying to share a roof for one night. They were beginning to form something steadier, something that didn't have a name yet, but was growing in every look, every shared task, every breath inside the cabin. When the night came, Brady didn't sit by the door as before. Instead, he sat closer to the fire, closer to them. Not touching, not imposing, just near enough that Nayati felt the difference. She looked at him one last time before the children drifted asleep. For the first time since the day her husband died, she didn't fear tomorrow. The next morning broke with a thin layer of frost clinging to the window and a quiet stillness inside the cabin. Brady awoke before dawn as usual, but instead of rising immediately, he stayed seated on the floor near the fire, studying the three sleeping figures curled together beneath the blankets. Thomas slept with his arm over his sister, holding her close. Nayati lay on her side, facing the fire, one arm stretched out protectively behind both children. Her hair spread across the blanket in long, dark strands, and the rise and fall of her breath was slow and even. It was the calmest he had seen her since she arrived. He felt a shift inside him, subtle but undeniable. Something about the scene reminded him why he couldn't send them back into the cold, no matter how complicated things might become. He had lived too long with silence and regret. Watching them sleep, something inside him settled. He stood quietly and stepped outside, pulling his coat tighter against the bitter air. The morning sky carried hints of pink along the horizon, a sign of clearer weather. Snow had fallen lightly overnight, leaving smooth patches around the cabin. He walked a slow circle, scanning the ridge the way he'd been trained years ago. The trees stood motionless. No human tracks disturbed the fresh powder. No signs of campfires or riders. Even so, he noted a detail he hadn't seen yesterday, a faint dragging mark near the far end of the creek line, half covered by new snow. He crouched down and brushed away the frost. The mark was long and narrow, not shaped like a boot or animal track. Something or someone had been through that area in the last 2 days before the heavier snowfall. It wasn't enough to sound an alarm, but it tightened his nerves. He returned inside, brushing off the snow before closing the door behind him. The warmth hit him immediately. The children were awake, sitting up near the fire. Aya rubbed her eyes while Toma held a small wooden carving Brady hadn't realized he'd left behind on the shelf. It was the horse he'd carved years ago. Toma looked up quickly, unsure if he'd done something wrong. "I'm sorry," he whispered, holding the carving carefully. "I didn't mean to take it. It was just nice." Brady walked over and crouched in front of him. "It's all right. You can hold it. Just don't drop it." The boy studied his face, checking for any hidden displeasure. When he saw none, he relaxed and turned the carving over in his hand with a mixture of fascination and respect. Nayati sat up slowly, tightening her shawl around her shoulders. She noticed Brady's coat still dusted with snow and the faint tension around his jaw. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not suspicious, but perceptive. "Something happened?" Brady shook his head once. "Just check the land. Nothing close. But there were old tracks near the creek. Not fresh. Could be nothing." Her posture stiffened. It was small, but he saw it. The fear wasn't loud. It lived under her skin like something she'd carried far too long. He added, "Tracks were at least a day old. Snow softened most of it. No sign they came this direction." Nayati exhaled slowly. She wasn't comforted entirely, but she didn't panic. Instead, she pulled her children closer and listened carefully as Brady continued with practical details. "I'll patrol again later. For now, let's eat." He warmed leftover rabbit stew and passed out bowls. While the children ate, Nayati studied him openly, as though trying to decide if she could trust him with another piece of information. She finally asked quietly, "If someone did come, would you want us gone?" "To avoid trouble." Brady looked her directly in the eyes, steady and unflinching. "If someone comes looking for you, they'll find me first. And I'm not giving you up." Her lips parted slightly, caught off guard by the firmness in his voice. She lowered her gaze, overwhelmed not by fear, but by the unfamiliar sensation of someone standing for her without hesitation. The children finished their food, and Brady stood to prepare for chores. I need to haul water from the creek. I'll show Toma how to help. Toma's head snapped up eagerly. I can do it. You're strong enough, Brady said. Come on, bundle up. The boy hurried to the door. Nayati stood, adjusting his blanket around him, making sure no cold air could slip in. It was the first time Brady saw her act without urgency, just a mother doing something ordinary. The moment struck him more deeply than expected. Brady opened the door and stepped outside with Toma. As they walked toward the creek, Brady slowed his steps so the boy could keep pace. You ever carried water before? He asked. Toma shook his head. We got water from streams, but we didn't carry big buckets. Brady handed him a smaller pail. We'll start with this. You don't have to fill it all the way. They reached the creek, its surface edged with ice but still flowing beneath. Brady broke off a thin crust with his boot, then dipped his bucket in. Toma mimicked his movements, careful not to tip the pail. When he lifted it, water sloshed onto his sleeve, and he gasped from the cold. Brady steadied the bucket before it spilled. You're doing fine, Brady said. Cold water gets easier to handle. Toma grinned, despite the sting. It was the most genuine expression Brady had seen from him so far. Back at the cabin, Nayati was cleaning near the hearth. She glanced up when she heard their steps. Her eyes followed Toma, studying his expression, checking for distress. When she saw only pride on his face, her shoulders loosened. You carried that whole bucket? She asked softly. Yes, he said, chest lifting in confidence. Brady set his own bucket down and grabbed extra firewood. As he did, Nayati stood and approached him. Her tone was quiet but certain. I want to help more. Not because you ask, but because I should. Brady looked at her calmly. You already do more than enough. She shook her head slowly. No, this is your home. I don't want to be someone who just waits for others to make things safe. Brady saw something shifting in her as she spoke, a strength returning, not forced but rebuilding. She no longer spoke like someone desperate to survive one more night. She spoke like someone preparing to build something steady. You can help with anything you want, Brady replied. Nothing here is off limits. Her eyes softened just a fraction. Thank you. As the day continued, Brady repaired a section of the outer fence while Toma fetched small tools and held nails steady. Nayati mended torn blankets with fine, practiced stitching and cleaned the cabin from top to bottom in a way that made it look more lived in. Aya followed her everywhere, clutching the hem of her mother's dress. Brady watched them all from time to time, not intruding, just observing the way the cabin felt different now. The silence wasn't harsh anymore. It was full of movement, small sounds, children shifting, Nayati humming quietly while she worked. But late in the afternoon, as he hammered the last nail in a place near the fence, Brady's eyes caught the tree lean again. A faint flicker, something small, maybe nothing. But his instincts sharpened. He scanned the ridge carefully. No riders. No figures. No movement. Still, the air felt heavier. He walked back to the cabin with deliberate steps. Nayati was stirring a pot over the fire when she noticed the tension in his shoulders. What is it? Brady set down the hammer slowly. I want to be sure of something. If someone from your past tried to come here, would they stop at words? Or would they bring others with them? Nayati's expression changed instantly. Not fear, but weary truth. They wouldn't come alone. Brady absorbed that without flinching. Then I'll be ready. She stared at him, confused by how easily he accepted the possibility of danger entering his quiet life. You don't even know us. I know enough, he said evenly. You're a mother protecting your children. That's all I need. Her throat tightened. Words failed her. Outside, the wind began to pick up again, moving through the trees with a long, low sound. The cabin walls didn't shake, but the cold pressed harder, warning them that winter wasn't finished yet. Inside, the four of them gathered near the fire, closer than the night before, without anyone noticing the shift. Trust had begun to form, but so had the first shadows of whatever might be following behind them. By the next morning, the wind had settled, but the cold had grown sharper, slicing through the air in a way that made every breath sting. Brady stepped outside before the others woke. his boots sinking into a fresh layer of powder that had fallen overnight. The silence felt heavier than usual, thick, still alert. He paused at the porch, scanning the tree-line with the same disciplined focus he carried from years on the trail. Nothing moved. No smoke. No voices. No animals stirred. But something was different. He walked toward the ridge where he'd seen the strange drag mark the day before. Snow had filled in most of it, but not all. A faint indentation remained, long, narrow, slightly curved. It didn't match any tool he owned, and it certainly wasn't made by an animal. He knelt, brushing away a thin sheet of frost. The shape reminded him of a rifle butt or the hard edge of a pack someone had dragged while exhausted or injured. Brady felt the back of his neck tighten. Someone had been here recently. Someone tired. Someone heading in the direction of his land. He stood slowly and scanned the tree-line again, taking note of every branch, every ridge, shadow. Years of scouting hadn't left him. He could still sense when the land felt unsettled. And today it wasn't settled at all. Back at the cabin, smoke rose softly from the chimney. Through the window, he saw Nayati stirring a pot over the fire, her hair loose and falling over one shoulder. Toma was stacking small pieces of wood carefully in a corner. Aya used a scrap of cloth to wipe the table with exaggerated importance. The sight eased him only briefly before the unease returned. He stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. Nayati turned toward him instantly. She saw something in his face, something she didn't need explained. "You found something?" Brady nodded once. "Old mark, but not old enough. Someone dragged something near the creek a few days ago. Can't tell if it was a person or gear." Toma froze mid-stack, looking between them. Aya crawled into Nayati's lap without being told. Brady crouched near the fire to warm his hands. "I'm not raising alarm," he said, voice steady. "But I want you prepared." Nayati pressed a hand to her daughter's back. "Could it be them?" "It could be anyone," Brady answered truthfully. "But it's enough to pay attention." She tightened her hold on Aya, but she didn't panic. She had lived through worse storms than this. Brady stood and grabbed his coat again. "I'm going to walk the upper ridge. I want to see if there's anything else I missed." Nayati rose quickly. "Let me help." He shook his head gently. "Not out there. Too cold. Too exposed." She stepped closer, meeting his eyes with a seriousness she had rarely shown. "I wasn't asking permission to wander aimlessly. I meant, tell me what to do here. Tell me how to keep them safe if you're not next to us." Brady didn't look away. He respected her directness. "If you hear anything strange, stay low to the floor and move the kids behind the bed. There's a space between the wall beams, strong wood, hard to hit through." Nayati listened carefully, committing every word to memory. And Brady added, "Don't open that door unless you hear my voice." She nodded once, firm and calm. "I understand." He hesitated for a brief moment, wanting to say more, something about trust or fear or the certainty that he wouldn't leave them unprotected, but words stuck in his throat. He simply rested his hand on the table, fingers tapping once before he headed out. Toma hurried after him. "Can I come again?" Brady knelt beside him, so their eyes met. "Not today. I need you here with your mother. That's the bigger job." Toma straightened, taking the task seriously. "I will." Brady placed a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder before stepping outside. The moment the door closed, Nayati felt the weight in the room shift. It wasn't dread, it was awareness. For the first time in months, she wasn't running, but she wasn't safe yet either. Survival now depended on staying alert, following Brady's instructions, and trusting the man who had already done more for them than anyone since her husband died. She moved to the window, watching Brady's figure make its way up the ridge. The sight stirred a mix of gratitude and fear she hadn't expected. Her life had been shaped by men who demanded, who commanded, who hurt. Brady did none of that. He simply left the cabin each day with quiet purpose, fixing fences, checking traps, repairing what nature or time had worn down. He wasn't soft. He wasn't loud. He was steady. Steady was something she didn't know how to handle yet. Inside the cabin, she turned her attention to what she could control. She packed her small belongings tighter, ensuring the children's extra blankets stayed within arm's reach. She checked the latch twice. She rehearsed Brady's instructions silently. Hide behind the bed. Stay low. Don't open the door. Wait for his voice. Toma approached her, whispering, "Is he coming back soon?" "Yes," she said, touching his cheek. "He always comes back. But what if he finds something up there?" Nayati didn't lie. "If he does, he will deal with it. Do you think he can fight bad men?" She swallowed, remembering the bruises on her wrists, the cold nights walking without food, the days when she carried one child while dragging the other. She remembered the men who forced her out, believing she wouldn't survive a single week on her own. Then she remembered Brady's voice the night before. "If someone comes, they'll find me first." Her answer carried a quiet certainty. "Yes, he can." At that moment, Brady reached the top of the ridge and paused. Through the window, Nayati saw him lift a hand as if testing the air. He crouched low, studying something they couldn't see from below. Toma pressed closer to the window. "What's he doing?" the boy whispered. Nayati leaned forward, her breath catching. Brady slowly stood upright, turned sharply toward the east, toward distant land hidden by the trees, and remained completely still. Aya crawled into her mother's arms. Toma reached for her hand. Nayati whispered, "He sees something." Brady finally moved, not in panic, but with controlled purpose. He descended the ridge in long, steady strides. Nayati stepped away from the window, readying the children the way he taught her. The door opened a moment later. Brady's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharper than before. "You're all right," he said, scanning the room quickly. "Stay close to me." Toma stepped forward first. "What did you find?" Brady rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, guiding him gently back. "Tracks fresh this time. Only one set. Moving slow." Nayati stiffened. "Someone hurt?" "Not sure," Brady said. "But whoever it is, they stopped not far from the ridge. Might be resting. Might be watching." Toma swallowed, fear creeping into his eyes. Nayati asked quietly, "Are they coming here?" Brady looked at her with a calm she needed more than she realized. If they were coming, they'd be closer already. "But I want to see who's out there before nightfall." "You're leaving again?" she asked, worry tightening her features. "Not far," Brady said, "just enough to understand what's coming." Before she could protest, he stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the cold still clinging to his coat. His voice dropped, steady and sincere. "I won't let anything happen to you. Any of you." Her breath caught. She looked at the floor briefly, overwhelmed by the certainty in his tone. When she lifted her head, her voice was steady. "Then tell me what to do while you're gone." He hesitated only a second before answering. "Pack what you need to move fast. Just in case." She didn't argue. She didn't ask how much danger they were in. She simply said, "I understand." Brady grabbed his rifle, slung it across his shoulder, and opened the door. Before stepping out, he looked back at them. Nayati clutching Aya, Thomas standing straight and brave, the firelight catching the fear and the strength in their eyes. Brady nodded once. Then he disappeared into the snow, heading toward whatever waited beyond the ridge. For the first time since she arrived, Nayati whispered a silent hope into the room. "Please come back." Brady moved through the trees with silent precision, every sense sharpened by the cold and the knowledge that whoever left those tracks was close. The snow muffled his steps, but the land still carried tiny sounds. Ice cracking under branches, wind brushing along the ridge. He followed the prints east, noting the uneven depth, the slight drag on the left side. Whoever was walked with pain or exhaustion. He slowed when he reached a fallen log. Fresh snow had been brushed aside by hand. A small depression showed where someone sat recently. Brady crouched and touched the spot, still faintly warm. The person couldn't be more than 20 minutes ahead. He scanned the tree line carefully before stepping out of cover. A figure stumbled into view from behind a cluster of pines. A man, tall but gaunt, coat torn, face pale beneath a patchy beard. He held one hand against his ribs under the coat, each breath sharp. His boots dragged unevenly through the snow. Brady raised his voice just enough to carry. "Hold it there." The stranger froze, turning slowly, eyes wide with fear. I'm not here to cause trouble. Please." Brady kept a steady aim, but didn't fire. Who are you? The man swallowed hard. Elias Kip. Haven't eaten in 2 days. I I saw smoke from your ridge yesterday, but didn't want to approach at night. Thought maybe I'd scare whoever lived there. Brady kept watching for lies. The man looked half frozen, shaking violently, lips blue. Not armed except for a small knife tied to his belt. No bulges suggesting hidden guns. Brady lowered the barrel a fraction. Why are you out here alone? Elias took a staggered step. Ambushed near Pine Crossing. Outlaws. Took my mule, my food, everything. I ran when they fought each other over the spoils. He coughed, doubling over. Didn't know where else to go. Brady studied the snow behind him. No second set of tracks. Anyone following you? No. They don't chase men who run empty-handed. Brady made a fast calculation. Bringing a stranger near Nayati and the children was dangerous. But leaving a half-dead man out here would condemn him. And if this man had seen something, if he knew anything about who moved along the valley, it could matter. Can you walk? Brady asked. Elias nodded weakly. Then come. Slowly. Back at the cabin, Nayati jerked her head toward the door at the sound of approaching steps. Toma moved in front of Aya, trying to appear brave. Nayati kept her hand on both children, the latch ready to hold if needed. Brady entered first, motioning for calm. Behind him, Elias limped inside, shivering violently. Nayati's eyes widened, but she said nothing, recognizing desperation in the man's posture. Brady guided him near the fire. Sit. Elias collapsed to the floor, breath breaking as the heat hit him. Thank you. God, thank you. Toma whispered. Who is he? A traveler, Brady said. Hurt. Hungry. Nayati moved quietly, pulling a blanket from the bed and placing it around Elias's shoulders. Her movements were cautious but compassionate. Elias looked up at her with gratitude. Ma'am, you're a blessing. She didn't answer, only stepped back to guard her children. Brady crouched beside the man. Tell me again who attacked you. Elias swallowed, voice trembling. 3 men. Brothers, I think. Rough types. One had a red scarf tied around his hat. They ran me off the road near the basin. They weren't after anything specific, just took what they could. Attention eased from Nayati's face. If these were random thieves, they weren't the same men from her past. Brady caught that shift. They weren't looking for anyone, he pressed. No, just mean and hungry. That answer mattered. It gave them time. Time Brady didn't know if they'd get. Nayati moved closer, lowering her voice. Does he stay? For now, Brady said. He's cold, not dangerous. Elias looked between them, confused but grateful. I'll work for my keep if you let me recover. Chop wood, fix fences, anything. We'll decide tomorrow, Brady said. Toma tugged Brady's sleeve. Are we safe? Brady rested a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. Yes, tonight we are. The snow thickened outside as the cabin warmed. Elias drifted into painful sleep. Nayati settled the children by the fire, glancing toward Brady often. Quiet gratitude mixed with uncertainty. Brady sat near the door, rifle beside him, eyes heavy but alert. Outside, the land remained silent. Inside, the 4 of them, 5 now, waited for the next dawn, not knowing that this stranger and the truth he carried would change the direction of their lives in ways none of them expected. Elias slept near the fire the rest of the afternoon, his breathing uneven but steady enough that Brady stopped worrying he'd collapse for good. The cabin stayed quiet except for the crackle of burning wood and the soft shuffling of the children as they played with scraps of cloth and bits of wood. Nayati stayed alert through it all, watching the stranger with a guarded expression. She trusted Brady's judgment, but trust didn't erase the scars left by men who promised safety before taking it away. Brady returned from stacking firewood outside, shaking snow from his coat. He's warming up, he said quietly, colors coming back to his face. Nayati didn't look away from Elias. You believe him? I believe he's hurt, Brady replied. And hungry. Lies don't keep a man alive in that shape. She considered that, then asked, did he mention anything else? Anything he saw on the way? Brady hesitated, then pulled a small scrap of cloth from his coat pocket. Found this near where he collapsed. It was a torn piece of saddle blanket, thick wool, stained with mud and something darker. Not his, Brady added. Too clean. Too new. Nayadi's eyes narrowed. Meaning what? Meaning someone else passed through recently, Brady said. Maybe before him. Maybe after. Her breath tightened. The idea that more than one traveler crossed so close, so soon after her escape, sent a tremor through her. But before she could reply, Elias stirred awake, coughing harshly. Brady knelt beside him. You're safe, he said. Drink slow. He handed him a tin cup of warm water. Elias sipped with shaking hands. When he finished, he looked around the cabin more clearly this time, noticing the children, the repaired blankets, the organized shelves. Didn't know anyone lived this deep out, he murmured. Thought this land was empty. It usually is, Brady answered. Elias rubbed his ribs, as if checking for broken bones. I owe you. All of you. Brady nodded once, acknowledging the words without dramatics. Nayadi watched the exchange, trying to read Elias's intentions. The man seemed genuine, but desperation made people unpredictable. Elias continued. The outlaws I mentioned, they headed south when they finished stripping me. One of them said something about a trader in Arroyo Bend who pays good coin for goods he doesn't ask questions about. Brady stiffened. Arroyo Bend's only 2 days west. Elias nodded. If they passed through these woods, they didn't stay long. They're looking for easy targets, not trouble. Nayadi exhaled slowly, turning her gaze toward the children. She seemed relieved that these outlaws weren't connected to her husband's cousins, yet tension remained. Old fear didn't vanish in a day. Brady stood and paced near the window, checking the light outside. The sky darkened earlier today, heavy clouds forming along the ridge. Storm's coming, he murmured. A bad one. Elias struggled to sit upright. If you want me gone before it hits. You're not going anywhere, Brady interrupted, tone firm but calm. You'd freeze before reaching the basin. Elias lowered his head in gratitude. Then let me earn it. I'll help however I can. Brady didn't answer. He turned toward Nayadi instead. Storm means we'll be stuck inside tomorrow. I want to stock the cabin tonight. More water. More wood. I'll help, Nayadi said immediately. He studied her a moment. Her readiness, her steadiness. All right, he said, but stay close. She grabbed her shawl, and together they stepped out into the cold evening air. Snowflakes drifted down in slow, heavy flakes, fat, wet, early signs of the coming storm. Nayadi followed Brady to the woodpile, watching the way he moved, the way he scanned the ridge, even while lifting heavy logs. She admired the control in his strength, the quiet discipline in his posture. You're worried, she said softly. He didn't deny it. Too much movement near the ridge for 1 week. Could be nothing. He set a log on the pile and turned to her. But we prepare either way. She stepped closer, the wind pushing her shawl against her body. Her torn neckline shifted again, revealing more of the curve of her chest in the dim light, but she didn't adjust it. She wasn't trying to draw his attention. Not tonight. She was simply too focused on his voice. What happens if the outlaws come this way? She asked. Brady tightened his jaw. They won't get near the cabin. She looked at him for a long moment. You're not alone in protecting this place. His gaze softened. He didn't argue. He didn't dismiss her offer. He simply nodded, accepting her as part of this home in a way neither of them had said aloud. When they finished gathering wood, Brady paused near the door before they went inside. I need you to know something, he said. His voice carried a seriousness he hadn't used before. If danger comes here, I won't run. Not now. Nayadi's breath caught. Because of us. Because this place isn't empty anymore, he said, and I don't intend to lose it. Her chest rose with a slow inhale. Not fear this time, but something deeper. Something beginning. Back inside, Elias slept again, the fire warming his tired body. Toma leaned against the bed, fighting sleep, while Aya curled on a blanket with a wooden spoon in her tiny hand. Brady shut the door against the rising wind. And for the first time since he found her on the ridge, Nayadi believed that everything in this cabin, every breath, every step, every promise, was beginning to bind them together in a way she could no longer deny. Tomorrow the storm would test them. But tonight, they were no longer strangers sharing warmth. They were becoming something else. The storm hit before dawn, a heavy wall of wind pushing against the cabin and rattling the shutters with a force that made the logs creak. Snow piled against the door, thick enough that Brady had to lean his shoulder into it just to check the latch. The sky outside was a blur of white and gray, the trees bending under the weight of the storm. They weren't going anywhere, and no one out there would either. Inside, the fire burned bright, filling the room with a steady heat. Toma and Aya stayed wrapped in blankets, eyes wide each time the wind struck the cabin. Nayati held them close, murmuring soft words in her own language, comforting them with a calm strength Brady hadn't seen before. Elias lay propped against the bed, looking better but still too weak to stand for long. Brady checked the firewood pile a third time, making sure nothing ran short. Every movement he made was deliberate, steady, controlled. But when he looked at Nayati, something gentler shaped his expression. "You're safe in here," he said quietly. Nayati met his eyes. "Because of you. Because of all of us," he corrected. The storm howled again, shaking the roof. Brady moved closer to the window, scanning the barely visible ridge through the distortion of snow. He wasn't expecting anyone in weather like this, but his instincts demanded he check anyway. After a long minute, he stepped back. "No tracks. Nothing moving," he said. Nayati exhaled slowly, relief softening her shoulders. But another question pressed forward, one she had ignored for days. "Brady, if those outlaws return when the storm ends, what will you do?" He turned toward her, the firelight catching the quiet certainty in his face. "I'll stand between them and this cabin. That's not changing." Elias shifted, trying to sit straighter. "If it helps, those men weren't searching for anyone. They were drifting wherever they could steal. They argued over everything. They'll never last a storm like this. You won't see them again." It was the final piece Nayati needed, the last unanswered worry that kept her from fully settling into this place. She nodded, absorbing the truth. A deep quiet fell over the room, not the silence of fear, but of understanding. Brady sat on the floor near the fire, boots off, coat unbuttoned. He looked at the children first. "How are you holding up?" Toma answered bravely, "I'm not scared. Storms are just loud." Aya crawled into Brady's lap without hesitation and pressed her cheek against his chest. Her tiny fingers clung to his shirt. Brady froze for half a second, uncertain how to position his hands, then slowly rested one palm on her back. Nayati watched him with a soft, uncertain expression. Brady's voice lowered. "She's warming up to me. She doesn't warm up to many," Nayati said, her voice tight with emotion. "She never trusted anyone after." She stopped, breath trembling. "After they forced us out." Brady met her eyes. "She's safe now." Nayati swallowed hard, a tear forming but not falling. "We all are." As the storm raged outside, the room grew warmer, closer. Elias drifted to sleep again. The children relaxed, no longer flinching at every gust of wind. Nayati sat near Brady, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm. She didn't move away. Neither did he. After a long pause, she spoke again, voice small but certain. "I thought offering myself was the only way to survive. When we first came, I believed that's what you expected." Brady shook his head slowly. "I never wanted that." "I know that now," she said. "You asked nothing of me. You protected us without asking why. You trusted us before we knew how to trust you." Brady looked at the fire, then back at her. "I don't want you to be afraid of me." "I'm not," she whispered. He reached out slowly, brushing a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. She didn't flinch. Her breath hitched, not from fear, but from something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. The storm roared, but inside the cabin, everything steadied. Toma watched the exchange with a seriousness that didn't match his age. "Brady, yeah. Are we staying here?" "For good." Nayati held her breath. Aya lifted her head from Brady's chest. Elias blinked awake, sensing the shift in the room. Brady looked at the boy first, then at the woman beside him, then at the home he had lived in alone for years. The answer formed slowly but firmly. "If you want this place," he said, "then it's yours." Nayati stared at him, stunned. "You mean that?" "I wouldn't say it otherwise." Her lips parted, breath shaking once before she steadied herself. "Then yes," she whispered. "We stay." Brady took her hand gently, carefully, like something precious, and she let her fingers curl around his without fear. The storm outside howled and slammed against the cabin, but it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a wall, one that separated the life they were leaving behind from the life they were choosing. When night settled fully and the fire dimmed, Nayati leaned her head against Brady's shoulder. Aya slept across his lap. Toma curled against the blanket. The room felt full, fuller than it had ever been. Brady tightened his arm around Nayati, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're home." She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the moment settle deep inside her. "Yes," she breathed. "We are." And that night, with the storm sealing the world outside, the four of them, five counting the recovering stranger, fell asleep knowing the wandering was over. The danger was past. The cabin was no longer a stop along their suffering. It was the beginning of a life rebuilt. Together.